This isn't a planned episode. A shocking news story broke on Tuesday in Melbourne and it's been covered around the country. And I think it's worth speaking into a little bit. What we've been reminded of is that there is evil. There is evil in Melbourne. I think it's fair to say that our city has been rocked since Tuesday when reports of a 26-year-old man who works across something like 20 childcare centres in our city, primarily in the western suburbs, has been caught sexually abusing young children in his care. He has been charged by police with multiple accounts involving sexual abuse of minors, 8 children so far. However, the families of 1,200 children, 1,200 children, their families have been contacted by authorities and requested that their children undergo medical examination for sexually transmitted disease from this man. And then yesterday, police announced a second man has been charged, again with crimes against young children that are so evil, so vile. I can't even bring myself to mention what he's allegedly done. How do you imagine the terror that's facing these families right now? The horror, the confusion, the pain, that sense of rage and rightful anger and hatred at these men for what they've allegedly done. And then the fears for their children, the confusion and anxiety that is building. It's like 100 different sharp knife emotions stabbing at and wielding around all at the same time. Today, thousands of Melbourne families who had their children in these centres and families who have placed their children into places where there are no allegations but are not understandably fearful and shocked and wondering, who can we trust? Now, it's not for me to guess or to speak as to how this may have happened and were there failures in the system. I don't know. Those are questions for authorities to investigate. But let's name it. It is evil. It is evil. And in naming it, we are recognizing, though, something that not everyone in our society believes in. Or we're recognizing something that not every worldview accepts as possible. In our society, there is this underlying, quiet, yet kind of smug insistence, sometimes from people who are too smart for themselves, to say, that evil doesn't ultimately exist. As in, for example, during the pandemic, the ABC published an article where the writer was arguing something similar, suggesting, death, it's not a very pleasant experience if it's you who's dying, but it's just part of nature's cycle, nothing more. Yes, bad things happen. And they seem bad because it hurts, but they're not inherently bad. So the idea goes that what we do is that we use language to try and soften the blow of what we experience. And so saying something is evil, it's putting a label onto a negative experience and it helps us cope, rather than actually saying, no, this is inherently evil. But that line of thinking, if you've come across it before, it's downright wrong and gross and hurts victims even more. And it's interesting because when it comes to sexual, to sins and crimes, sexual evil, it's more than simply a category. It's more than just a matter of consent, isn't it? When people argue consent is the only qualifier of what is acceptable sexually or not, no, there's more going on, surely. But see, if all there is in this universe is mathematics and matter, right? There's no God. There is no ultimate being in charge. So there's no ultimate right and wrong. Now, what we have, at most, are little rights and wrongs. And they are right and wrong where we agree things are acceptable or not. And it's only because there's group's consensus rather than there being a universal truth. To have universal truth, you need to have something organizing the universe who isn't us and who doesn't depend upon a democratic vote. So we might talk about a little e evil or little j justice, because these are things that help us to get by and make sense of life. But how can you possibly talk about an ultimate justice or big good? The philosopher Alvin Plantinga once put it like this: Could there really be any such thing as horrifying wickedness if there were no God and we just evolved? I don't see how. There can be such a thing only if there is a way that rational creatures are supposed to live, obliged to live. A way of looking at the world has no place for genuine moral obligation of any sort, and thus no way to say there is a thing as genuine or an appalling wickedness. Accordingly, if you think there really is such a thing as horrifying wickedness, not just an illusion of some sort, then you have a powerful argument for the reality of God. And a similar thing happens with the ideas of compassion and grace and healing. If there is no God, what are these things called compassion and grace and healing other than an evolutionary product to help us survive as a species? They're not inherently good and necessary. No, it's just cosmic luck. They are chromosomal or chemical or cultural byproducts of evolutionary processes. But again, what a lot of nonsense. And it's not only cognitive dissonance, but moral dissonance and existential dissonance. We know justice and compassion are more than just ways of describing our preferences or wants. And we know evil isn't simply just a way of categorizing things that we hate or are afraid of. You see, we need a God who is above us and outside of the universe, not part of it, separate from and yet who can define what is right and evil, justice and compassion, and who has shaped the universe to have and need these things. You see, a world without God simply doesn't have the capacity to expose the problem of evil to be as big and dangerous as it is. In fact, when we read through the Bible, it makes the problem of evil really, really big, and allows us and gives us categories to appreciate why it is so big and terrible. See, what we have heard about in the last 48 hours in Melbourne is truly evil, unspeakable. It is evil by nature and definition, whether we know it happened or not, whether we call it evil or not, it is. Evil is present and perpetuating around our city every day, every night. How many times must we hear of another woman murdered by someone she knew? Or how many times must we hear stories of domestic violence and abuse? And then there is that increase of criminal activity and fire bombings and gangland killings. And some of the most insidious evils are done in the open and illegal. Think of some of the business practices we hear of, or how people's lives are destroyed, their reputations are destroyed by slander or innuendo. And sometimes society even protects evil and calls it good. The reality is human beings have great capacity to justify and rationalize what is in fact wrong or harmful, or to use a Bible word, sinful. You see, the Bible gives us a kind of vocabulary that we need to describe what's happening. It is clear from the Bible that God hates evil. He opposes it with every fiber of his being. In the book of Genesis, we read this as an example. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts and of the human heart was evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So what has God done about evil? Well, let me mention 4 things quickly. I will take time to unpack each of these thoroughly, but just for now, I just want to list them briefly. 4 things that God has done. Firstly, God made creatures, that is human beings, who are accountable. Human beings are made with capacity and responsibility. We are sentient beings and moral creatures. We have a conscience, which is functioning like a moral compass. The Bible talks about how that moral compass is broken and it's got a twisted in all of us, but it's still working to some extent, so we can't claim ignorance. So we find this sentence in the Bible from the book of Romans. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them and at other times even defending them. A second thing God has done, God organized the world such that people have communities where we communicate together, we build together, we have things in common, and we have these things called governments who oversee and protect and even punish these groups of people. As a church, we're currently reading through one of the Bible books called First Peter. And in First Peter, we read these sentences, and we read them as a church a few weeks ago. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as to the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. So God has built the world in such a way that he's organizing communities and nations and groups, and there are governments who oversee to provide justice and protection to punish those who do evil. Third, there is hell. There is divine judgment. Also from 1 Peter. In fact, these are words that I was preaching on just last Sunday. We read, they are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless wild living, and they heap abuse on you, but they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. So that verse is saying, as we find throughout the Bible, everyone will give an account to God. Everything matters. Our thoughts, our desires, our words, our actions. Every offense is ultimately an offense against God. So when we are sinned against, God takes it personally. He is offended. He is outraged when people are hurt and when people abuse children. He is angry with the rage of hell that is coming on those perpetrators. Right? And whatever justice our judicial system is going to meter out, it is nothing compared to what is awaiting when they meet God. And that's a scary thought. And there's one other place where justice meets and where justice and mercy meet. It's the cross of Jesus. The supreme act of evil is the cross, where like every legion of evil was working together and plotting and through people to kill God, to do away with the Son of God, who is the one who is perfectly innocent and good. He is the life giver. Let's get rid of him. So on the cross where Jesus died, two things were happening. Firstly, people did evil, and God was defeating evil. The first Christian sermon was preached by Peter. He was speaking to thousands of people just weeks after Jesus rose from the dead, and he said this. This man, meaning Jesus, was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it is impossible for death to keep its hold on him. There is evil on the cross, and God is defeating evil. See, the cross is the ultimate answer, the one which people have ever since gone back to and drawn upon for solace, for forgiveness, and for hope. The cross says God hates evil. And the cross says Jesus has overcome evil. The cross says there is hope and there is newness through Jesus. The cross says, and the resurrection of Jesus says, God will make all things new. He will set things right. He will judge. Last night, as I was thinking about this story and what's transpiring around Melbourne, these words from Psalm 55 came to mind. It reminds me how the God of the Bible empathizes, he understands, he's angry with us and for us. So Psalm 55 says this, "My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove, and I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm." And here are these words from Psalm 23. Let me finish with these words, because these are words that remind us that we don't have to walk through this alone, but there is a God who is appalled. There is a God who says there is a hell for perpetrators of evil. And there is a God who can walk with us through that valley. Psalm 23 has these wonderful words. He says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And that's my prayer, that through these very dark days ahead for, potentially thousands of families around Melbourne, that you can hold on to that promise and to know that after that valley, there is a God who promises that he will make all things right.